It started with a look. Not a word, not a shout. Just a slow, disapproving glance from a man who thought he knew who belonged in first class. The luxury cabin of Flight 227, bound from Casablanca to Geneva, buzzed softly with the quiet confidence of the wealthy. Leather seats, silk ties, gold watches. Everyone smiled, but no one really looked. Until he stepped in. Keanu Reeves walked on board, like he'd missed his stop at a train station. Denim jacket, weathered boots, a backpack that had clearly lived more than a few lifetimes. No assistant, no phone in hand, just a paperback book clutched like it meant more than any champagne menu. He checked his ticket and sat in 14B. He didn't ask for help. He didn't expect attention. But he got it anyway. Carter Langston noticed him first. The man was practically designed to judge. Rolex shining under the mood lighting, cufflinks sharp enough to draw blood, and a voice smooth like oil. Expensive, slippery. He leaned toward his wife and muttered, "Well, first class must be feeling generous." She smirked, sipping her wine. Neither of them laughed, but both knew they were laughing on the inside. Then came the second surprise. He walked in with the quiet power of someone who had seen both war and silence. Dark-skinned, broad-shouldered, eyes scanning the cabin, not with suspicion, but precision. His field jacket was plain, maybe too plain for this cabin of status and silk. He nodded and sat down beside Keanu in 14C without a word. A few heads turned. One eyebrow lifted. No one asked his name. Jessica Wynn, an influencer with just enough followers to think she mattered, tilted her phone discreetly. "Guys, I think Keanu Reeves is here." Or like his homeless twin. And the dude next to him? Straight up Wakanda vibes. Laughing emojis flooded her live stream. She bit her lip, clearly proud of herself. No one stopped her. Everyone watched. Carter chimed in, without even being asked. "Didn't know they let bodyguards sit with their clients now." His wine swirled like judgment in a glass. Still, neither man responded. Then came the wine menu. The flight attendant smiled tightly, asking, "Would you like Bordeaux, Mr. Langston?" Carter smiled wider. "Of course. And maybe something in plastic for these two. You know, just in case they're not used to crystal." The flight attendant froze for a split second. So did the air. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked up. Not angry, just calm, like someone who had walked through worse. But before he could speak, the man beside him did. "I do not drink," he said simply. His voice carried that quiet authority only earned, never learned. "But thank you for your concern." Jessica chuckled into her phone again. "Wow, a classy terrorist. Bet he has better manners than half this cabin." Keanu closed his book. Ibrahim didn't move. The cabin shifted, not physically, but emotionally. Something had started. You could feel it in the air. That quiet kind of hostility, passed around like wine, but bitter underneath. From behind, someone whispered, "He keeps looking at the aisle." "Military," someone else said, or pretending to be. "I don't feel safe," muttered a woman. Carter grinned. "Maybe Libya, maybe Syria, definitely not Swiss." And still, the two men in row 14 said nothing. But the storm had started. It wasn't in the sky. It was in their minds. And at 37,000 feet, judgment had just taken off. Hey, if you're still here watching, drop a 2 in the comments. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. We see you. And these stories reach further because of you. The plane climbed steadily. But inside, things were shifting fast. Keanu leaned back in his seat, eyes closed but far from asleep. Beside him, Ibrahim hadn't blinked in minutes, his posture straight, his gaze locked out the window. Silence surrounded them. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows judgment, tightens it, and waits for something, anything, to snap. It started small. A man in the back shifted uncomfortably. A woman 3 rows ahead tilted her wineglass toward them with a raised brow. Jessica was still streaming, whispering into her mic like she was narrating a Netflix thriller. He hasn't moved. The dude next to Keanu is like Homeland Season 3 in real life. Her followers dropped flame emojis, wide eyes, and suspicious gifs. Carter, enjoying the attention in his own way, leaned back theatrically and said loud enough for several to hear, "You know, the jacket? It's military. North African. Mercenary, maybe. Or maybe just pretending to be." Then came the trigger. A man from economy stumbled up the aisle, clothes wrinkled, smell of vodka trailing behind. He looked lost at first, blinking as if the lights were too bright for him. But then he stopped, right by row 14, and just stood there, breathing heavy, holding his bag tight. Too tight. Jessica perked up again. Wait, that guy wasn't in business class. Oh my God. He's standing right next to Wakanda guy. Her phone was angled, recording. Her voice dropped into a breathy panic. "You guys, something's going on." Carter tilted his head and smirked. "Interesting," he said. "Of all the people he could be looking at, he picks our friend in the jacket." Then, even louder. "You seeing this? Middle Eastern? Definitely trained somewhere. That's not a tourist." More whispers. "That bag doesn't look right. He hasn't opened it since boarding. Should we say something?" The drunk man's hand moved to the zipper, slowly, deliberately. Ibrahim's head tilted slightly. Keanu's eyes opened. The air inside the cabin wasn't just tense. It was flammable now, and someone had just struck the match. Silence. "That's what you want, isn't it?" the man mumbled, voice low and strange. His fingers closed on the zipper. A gasp rang out. A man stood. Another pressed the call button. Jessica whispered into her phone, "Something's happening. You guys, look at this." Then Carter shouted it, loud, clear, panicked. "He's with them. He's one of them." He pointed at Ibrahim like he had just spotted a weapon. And that was it. Screams, movement. A woman dropped her wine. A tray clattered to the floor. People rushed toward the exits. The man yanked the zipper, revealing a tangle of wires, batteries, blinking lights. Keanu stood first, calm, steady. "Everyone stay back." But Ibrahim was already moving. 3 steps. That's all he needed. The first knocked over Carter's Bordeaux, splashing red across his expensive suit. The second shifted his stance. The third, like lightning, sent his boot crashing into the drunk man's wrist, knocking the bag away and sending it skidding across the floor. Wires spilled out like snakes. Someone screamed. The man lunged wildly, but Ibrahim caught his arm mid-swing, twisted, and slammed him into the floor with a smooth, practiced motion. A knee to the back, a palm to the temple. Done. Keanu was right there, pulling his belt free and looping it tightly around the man's wrists, cinching it with sharp, experienced control. The attacker whimpered. The cabin froze. A flight attendant knelt by the bag, her hands trembling. She looked inside. "It's fake," she whispered. "Just speakers, batteries, no detonator." No one cheered. No one moved. Because it wasn't fear anymore. It was realization. They had all just watched a man they mocked save their lives. Silence filled the cabin, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that presses down, thick with shame and stunned awareness. The fake bomb lay under a seat, wires still twitching from the plane's quiet hum. But no one looked at it anymore. Every pair of eyes had turned to row 14. Keanu stood tall, his breath steady. Ibrahim was still kneeling beside the subdued man, his posture calm, professional. Like this wasn't the first time he'd been in the middle of chaos. He hadn't said a word since the takedown. He didn't need to. The truth had already spoken louder than any voice in the cabin. Jessica's phone had stopped streaming when it slipped from her hand and hit the carpeted floor. But thousands had already seen it. Her laughter, her mockery, her panic. Now she sat frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Across from her, Carter Langston looked pale, his designer suit drenched in Bordeaux. The man who'd spent the entire flight making jokes now had nothing to say. A flight attendant, the young Cameroonian named Amali, stepped forward slowly. Her hands still shook as she looked at Ibrahim. Not with suspicion this time, but with awe. She spoke gently, respectfully. "Sir, may I ask your name?" Ibrahim looked at her, his expression finally softening. He reached inside his jacket pocket, not rushed, not slow, just certain. He pulled out a dark blue wallet and opened it. A diplomatic passport, gold lettering shining under the cabin lights. Amelie leaned in, read the name, and stepped back, stunned. "Ibrahim Traoré," she whispered. "President of Burkina Faso." A gasp spread through the rows like an invisible wave. A man in row 12 dropped his earbuds. A woman covered her mouth. One of the passengers who had whispered earlier just stared at the back of Ibrahim's head, like it now held all the answers to every mistake she'd just made. Jessica's phone buzzed again. Comments were flooding in. "You mocked a sitting president. That man you called a terrorist just saved your life. You owe the entire continent an apology." Her face turned white. Her boyfriend, who had been recording her reactions, slowly leaned away from her in his seat, like the guilt was contagious. Carter tried to speak. His voice trembled. I didn't know." Keanu finally looked at him, his face unreadable. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You didn't know, but you thought you did." Silence returned, heavier than before. Not because of fear, because of truth. Keanu turned to Ibrahim. "You didn't flinch," he said softly. Ibrahim responded without pride. "Old habit. Comes with the uniform." No one clapped. No one needed to. The judgment had already been passed. And it didn't need applause. It only needed a mirror. The descent began, but no one moved. Seatbelts stayed untouched. Trays remained down. The cabin wasn't preparing for landing. It was still bracing for the weight of its own reflection. Jessica stared at her phone, like it had betrayed her. Her notifications were spiraling out of control. The same followers who laughed with her minutes ago were now turning on her. Unfollowed. Delete your account. You smiled while judging a president. Even her boyfriend sat stiffly, his body angled away from hers like he wanted to disappear into the seat. Jessica didn't cry. She just sat, silent, realizing this was bigger than a bad stream. She had become the villain in someone else's truth, and the internet never forgets. Carter, still drenched in red wine and silence, kept fiddling with his napkin like it held the right words he couldn't find. He looked over at Ibrahim, who sat composed, eyes forward, unmoved by the buzz. And Keanu, steady, still, watching the ripple of guilt flow through a cabin that once whispered with confidence. Then, Amelie returned, her voice calm. No longer just a flight attendant, but a woman who had watched enough men be judged for the wrong reasons. She gently placed a new bottle of Bordeaux on Carter's tray table. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, her tone soft but sharp. "But I thought you could use a glass of humility." A man in the next row exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. Another whispered, "That was perfect." No one laughed now. Not even Carter. He looked down at the wine, but he didn't touch it. Something inside him had cracked, and everyone could see it. The captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Geneva. Local time is 6:27 p.m. Weather is clear." Still, no one reached for overhead bins. No one unbuckled. The plane was landing, but the people inside were still falling, morally, emotionally, and in every way that counts. Moments before the aircraft docked, two men in dark suits entered through the front. Calm, professional. They walked straight to Carter. "Mr. Langston," one of them said, flashing a badge. "We'd like a word after landing." regarding passenger conduct, verbal aggression, and false accusation of a federal threat. Carter froze. The words hit harder than the wine ever did. He nodded, unable to speak. The plane touched down softly, but the echo it left behind was loud. Keanu and Ibrahim were asked to disembark privately through a diplomatic corridor. No fanfare, no cameras, just quiet dignity. They picked up their few belongings, just a book, a backpack, and a presence that now meant more than any title. At the gate, a little girl broke away from her mother, clutching a small teddy bear. She walked up to Ibrahim and looked up with innocent, wide eyes. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. Ibrahim knelt down, rested a hand on her shoulder, and smiled gently. "You're safe now. That's what matters." The man they had once feared had just become the one they'd never forget. Keanu and Ibrahim walked side by side through the terminal, no words needed. What had happened on that flight was more than just a near threat. It had become a mirror. And not everyone liked what they saw. As they neared the lounge, Keanu looked back through the glass wall. Some passengers walked quickly, heads low. Others paused and stared at the corridor, like they were hoping for forgiveness. "It won't come from us," Keanu whispered. Ibrahim nodded. "Some people sit in first class," Keanu continued, "because they bought the seat. And some," Ibrahim finished, "because they earned it." At the final checkpoint, Ibrahim turned to Keanu, offered a handshake, firm, steady. "Thank you for not stepping back." Keanu shook it. "Thank you for never stepping aside." Behind them, only echoes remained. Carter had been escorted out, not in cuffs, but in consequence. Jessica's stream was still trending, for all the wrong reasons. And Emily? She was already being recommended for a leadership commendation. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it walks off the plane in silence, dressed in dignity. And not every threat carries wires and blinking lights. Some come wrapped in designer suits, broadcast through a phone, or disguised as caution. This wasn't just turbulence. It was a reminder. Have you ever been judged by how you looked, where you're from, or how you speak? Or maybe you've caught yourself judging too quickly. Drop your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, because truth like this deserves to travel. And if this story moved you, share it. The world needs reminders like this, because sometimes the worst storms aren't in the skies. They're in the human heart, and only truth can bring it safely home.